Hi, I'm Chris Wilson. I ran Grinding Gear Games for 17 years, and during that time, I reviewed close to 10,000 job applications and ended up hiring hundreds of developers. So I released my first YouTube video a month ago, which was the interview with David Brevik, and it did really well. And I received a lot of email in response. The second most common question that people asked me was how they could get into the game development industry. Turns out there are a lot of people out there who really want to be game developers, want to be making games, but they don't know how to get started. And they have a lot of questions ranging from how they should organize their learning to what subjects they should study at university. So, in this video, I'm going to cover the cyclic nature of the games industry, why people should be spending their time making many small games, specific advice for each of the major game development disciplines, and how to structure a job application once you're ready to actually apply for a job. The target audience of this video is people wanting to get into the games industry, not really for established developers. Maybe there'll be some advice in here that's useful for people that are already in this industry, but I'm mostly going to be assuming that you're a person starting out who wants to end up joining a game studio. This is as opposed to making your own studio. That's something that's very challenging. It was the path I took, and there's a bit of survivorship bias here. I look back at what happened, realizing that I'm a fraction of 1% of people that were successful due to a combination of factors, much of which is luck. And so the advice I'm giving today is the safe path, how to join an established studio and make games with other experts. The one sentence summary for this video, and the advice that I give if I'm low on time, is just go make a bunch of games. But telling someone who doesn't know how to make games to just go make a bunch of games is one of those now draw the rest of the owl situations. This video will hopefully help explain how to go about doing this. An important topic here is the cyclicity of the games industry. It operates on boom and bust cycles, and at the moment we're very much part of a bust cycle. Throughout the industry over the last couple of years, there have been huge amounts of layoffs, tons of experienced and talented developers are looking for jobs. And so you may wonder, why am I recommending that people start learning game development when experienced developers are struggling to find work? And the answer is, we're preparing for the next boom cycle. 5 years ago, when COVID meant that everyone was locked down at home, they were playing a lot of games. And that meant that studios oversubscribed the number of staff they had. They started extra projects. And 5 years later, when there's less money relative to then being spent on games, those projects are being cancelled and people are being laid off. But in the future, there will be another boom, and that's why it's important to start developing your skills now. If you start learning how to develop games at the moment, then in a number of years, once you're ready to join the industry, there'll be a lot of hiring going on and you'll be able to get a job. In the meantime, if you treat it as a fun hobby and a useful set of skills to gain, then it's something you can spend your spare time on skilling up in preparation for a potential career change in the future. The other elephant in the room, of course, is generative AI, and there's a lot of doom and gloom about this in the games industry. My recommendation here is treating it more as a powerful tool that needs talented humans to guide it. It may be that a number of years from now, a lot of game development is done using AI, but that's why it's important that you, as a developer, establish all of the manual skills now so you'll properly know how to direct the AI in the future. So an important topic I want to bring up is that you can't be just an ideas person in the game industry. I very commonly get emails from people that have these amazing game ideas they fleshed out over a number of years, they've been thinking about for a long time, 100-page documents explaining exactly how the game would work. But unfortunately, this isn't very useful. Everyone has their own game ideas. I've got 10 games I want to make in my head, and so does everyone that I've worked with in the industry. Studios have their own plans, and it's extremely rare for them to hire someone who is a pure ideas person unless they've really validated themselves over time. The reality is, the person in the studio that gets to decide the ideas for the game that's being made is usually the person providing the money for it to be made. Now, it's potentially an option for you to make your own studio to make this ideal dream game, but unless you're sitting on a huge pile of money, that's going to be really hard. Now, I plan to do a future video about funding games. There may be some options there, but the reality is the most practical way to get to contribute ideas to a real game is to learn a real development discipline, like become a programmer, become an artist, become a producer, do something useful for a studio, and then, of course, you can contribute ideas to the pot that everyone is. So how do you learn a development discipline and actually get into the games industry? Well, you can't just go and read a pile of books and then ask a studio to hire you, as they'll want people that have practical experience making games. And the best way to demonstrate that you have practical experience is to have a portfolio of lots of games that you've made. I recommend starting incredibly small and fast and working up to something more complex. For example, if you're a programmer, go implement Breakout, implement Space Invaders, implement Tetris, and gradually get more complicated. Don't rush into making your magnum opus immediately. It's a very common trap where people will have some very complicated game in their head, underestimate how difficult it is, and kind of get stuck a quarter of the way through implementing that. What you want to be doing to improve your skills is implementing smaller, more complete games and gradually working up the size and scale of the scope. This not only gives you great experience for all the different aspects of the game development cycle, but means that you'll have a portfolio of many games that you're able to show prospective employers. It's okay to expect to be bad at first. You will definitely get better. It's like running, right? No one starts running and is amazing off the bat. It's gonna suck for a long time, but it's almost inevitable that the more you do it, the more skilled you'll become. And that's the case with game development. A nice thing about this approach is if you try to start making games as a hobby with small ones that you can complete in a few weeks, and you really hate it, if you're just not enjoying it, then it's really good that you worked this out before you perform a massive career pivot into games. If you only found out after finishing a 3-year game development course and then getting into your first studio that you really dislike the day-to-day work, that would be very unfortunate. And so if you start making small games and trying it out, you'll soon find out whether you have the passion for this to become a big part of your life in the future. These days, it's easier than ever for you to learn stuff. We have amazing resources that just weren't available in the past. YouTube has tutorials on everything. You've got various LLMs like ChatGPT that are able to walk you through the process of learning different things. There are game jams triggering pretty much every weekend somewhere. And I'd recommend you do look into game jams. Basically, a game jam is a organized event which has a theme, and people either work solo or band into teams in order to make small games within a certain time constraint. And so this is a perfect example of making games under some degree of pressure. It's quite fun putting something together, and you end up with something you can be proud of afterwards that's pushed your boundaries as a game developer. I'd also recommend attending industry events to network. You might be able to find community game developer meetups in your city, or potentially going to an event such as PAX and meeting up with other indie developers there, or potentially just joining some game development discords and hanging out with people online. Another way to meet game developers and to practice making small games is getting into modding of existing games. There are lots of communities out there built around modding games like Minecraft, Diablo 2, pretty much anything that is popular has some degree of modding community for it. And this is a great place to not only practice, again, making small games, because a mod to a game is in itself a game, but also getting to meet other people doing the same kind of thing and having people who can help support your learning. Now let's go through each of the major game development disciplines, and I'll explain what they are and how to get into them. So let's start with game design. A lot of people want to be game designers, but they imagine it more like the ideas person that I mentioned before, where you basically think up games and then someone else makes them for you. The reality is that design is a much more disciplined, iterative process. Many of the best designers don't necessarily ever contribute overall game ideas, but still make the game actually fun to play through good design. And there are kind of 3 types of design I want to talk about here. First of all, there's systems design. Systems design is the underlying rules of the game. It's basically like how things, to use a Path of Exile example, how experience works, how you level up, how you allocate skill points, how accuracy and evasion work. Basically the rules of how the underlying game is structured. This is all very important, but it's often not particularly glamorous to work on. The next type of design is content creation, and this is kind of the grunt work of design, is going through the game and basically hooking everything up so that it works correctly. It's usually the designer's responsibility to do scripting for various monsters and boss fights and events, and making sure that things are parameterized correctly. Quests are triggered based on the right conditions, monsters spawn in the right places, they have the right cooldowns on their skills and so on. And there's a lot of work throughout large games getting all of this set up. It means many, many designers have to sit there hooking up content without really getting to do very much in the way of systems design or actual balance. But it's still a very, very important role within the design team. And then the final type of design is balance. And this is basically making sure that values are correct. And sure, you can eyeball them to start with, but the difficult process here is trying to work out how to change the values based on feedback. If there's a particular fire enemy in your game doing too much damage, is it the case that the enemy is doing too much damage, that it's doing too much fire damage, that the player doesn't have enough fire resistance by that point, that fire damage in general is overpowered, etc.? There's a lot of different things that can cause a specific problem, and the trick with balance is finding out which of the things is actually contributing and then going and correcting that. So in terms of getting into game design, there are a number of ways you can do it. There is value in making full game design documents. So that's basically where you sit down and try to plan out exactly how a game would work, less from an ideas point of view and more from a practical systems point of view, where you actually, basically give a flow chart for different systems, maybe some pseudocode. You basically write a rule book for how the game functions. Now, if you want to become a systems designer, it's worth trying to design a game where the design is basically all of the gameplay, essentially a board game. A great example of this might be the Incursion League from Path of Exile. That's where you're basically customizing a temple by traveling back in time to change the decisions that architects made in the past. And we approached that essentially on paper as a board game, where for the first week of development, we're sitting there moving bits of paper around on the floor, trying to work the rules out and make sure that it's solid before we even touched a computer. And that's systems design. It's something that's a difficult process to practice. It essentially makes you into a board game designer, but it's really good to encounter people that have a very, very good understanding of systems design and lots of experience. And it doesn't really even involve touching a computer until you want to go and make a spreadsheet of it or potentially implement a prototype. If you want to practice content creation or balance, one option is to mod an existing game. If you pick your favorite game and just try to make additional content for it, add some additional monsters with new properties, try to add a quest in, try to balance it differently, this is really good practice at doing those specific areas without you having to go to the work of making the entire rest of the game yourself in order to practice this. So when you actually go to apply for a company as a game designer, treat the games you have designed and the mods you've worked on as a portfolio, but be really clear to list which elements of them you worked on. In the case of a mod, make sure it's clear what you have added to the game versus what existed in the base game. I should also note that being able to code is incredibly useful for game designers. If you're looking at getting into this discipline and becoming a game designer, then I'd recommend learning at least rudimentary scripting capabilities. A large amount of game design these days is done in script, and so it's really good for you to be ahead of the curve there. Okay, so let's talk about what it takes to become an artist. There are lots of different types of artists that contribute to game projects, from concept artists, high poly artists, low poly artists, material artists, animators, visual effects people. There are so many different disciplines you can get into here. Now, I want to note that I'm not an artist. This is an area that I can give less advice about, but YouTube is bountiful with tutorials. If you're looking at getting into any of those specific art disciplines, there are lots of resources online, both paid and free, that you can use to actually improve your skills. If you're passionate about art already, which I assume is the case if you're becoming a game artist, then you probably already have an interest in one of those specific areas. You probably imagine yourself doing visual effects, or you imagine yourself doing animation, or potentially high poly sculpting or whatever. And I'd recommend following your passion here. You want to work on an area that you really enjoy doing. So when it comes to actually applying for a job as an artist to a company, your portfolio is key. Make sure that it impresses. Make sure that you've researched the type of game that you're going to be working on, and you've structured your portfolio to highlight that type of work. So next up, I want to talk about programming, an area close to my heart because I trained as a programmer myself. There are lots of different types of programmers that work on games. There's gameplay programmers, tools programmers, back-end programmers, graphics programmers, and it's really common to learn a specific set of skills and apply for one of those roles. Of course, you can be a generalist, which is useful, but some degree of specialization into, for example, being a good graphics programmer really helps fit specific job requirements that companies have. In terms of how to get into game programming, we're honestly in the best era that has ever existed. It has never been easier than it is now because there are so many good resources available for us. There are really advanced tools. YouTube has millions of hours of content that you can follow along with at home to learn different skills. There are free tutorials about pretty much every topic. If you're stuck on something, you can ask an LLM like ChatGPT for an explanation that's actually tailored to your specific problem, which can be useful. Though I do preach caution with using the AI tools. It's very important for you to learn how to actually code yourself rather than just learning how to prompt a system and then copy and paste the answers. In terms of practical advice about which actual frameworks and toolkits to learn, you honestly can go with any of the big ones, even starting with something like GameMaker or Python with Pygame for your first projects, moving on to Unity or Godot, which are both used in large commercial games, potentially Unreal Engine, which of course is very popular and produces some very impressive results. In terms of languages to learn, C# is used in a lot of these. C++ is used in Unreal and also a lot of custom game engine games like Path of Exile. But I'd recommend dabbling in all of the above. It's good to have a variety of experience and basically a different toolkit of languages that you know. Like with art, your portfolio of code you've written is important. When you're applying for a job, include a summary of the projects you've coded on, what you did for each one, and ideally samples of code from the above. If you've got a GitHub account, it's a great way of providing all of this in one place for the prospective employer to have a look through. So next up, I want to talk about production. So a producer in a game company is essentially someone who does project management. They handle what people are working on, what tasks are next in the pipeline, unblocking certain people, working out what it is that's going to be holding people up in the future, and basically just making sure that stuff flows smoothly. Good production means that projects are done on budget and on time. Now, this means that if you're a project manager in another industry and want to pivot to being a producer in game development, this is possible. But it's important to learn as much as you can about the game development pipeline to be able to actually plan for what things happen in what order. It's important to understand, for example, that once a high poly model has been baked out into a low poly model, it then needs to be rigged before it can be handed on to an animator or a visual effects person. And that kind of pipeline there, the more you know about it, the more you'll be able to do better planning in a producer role for games. This is a tricky role to get into because you can't really get into it without having hands-on experience with a project, game project to manage. And so it's a bit of a chicken or egg thing. But I'd recommend basically trying to find hobbyist projects out there which you can contribute to as a project manager and gradually learn the ropes of game development as part of that process. It's worth splashing a small amount of time onto each discipline, like art and programming and so on, so you understand what they are, what they do, how it all fits together. Basically, the more well-rounded a developer, a producer is, the more they can effectively actually manage a project by understanding everything that's going on and what the requirements are. Next up, quality assurance. So QA is often viewed as game testing, but it's actually a lot more complicated. A QA person doesn't just sit down and play the game and write down whether or not they had fun. They're generally testing specific functionality or specific changes to the game to make sure that those meet specification. And they try to systemically find and document bad behavior and border cases. So, for example, let's say a game allows you to equip a weapon. The programmer implements this feature and passes it over to QA. And so the QA person would obviously go into game and make sure the weapons can be equipped, but they also need to test counterexamples. What if you try to equip a weapon that's an invalid level? What if you try to equip a weapon that you don't actually have in your inventory right now? It's on the ground. What if you equip a weapon that's in the shop that another player is holding? What if you equip two weapons at the same time? What happens then? What if you try to equip a weapon as you're firing it? What if you equip a weapon as you're changing area? There are a lot of things that need to be considered there, and it's possible that the programmer who implemented it only managed to cater for some of those cases. And so the QA person will ideally find cases where it breaks and pass them back. The important skills here are a systemic approach to exploring a system and very clear communication. You have to document exactly what went wrong, exactly what you did as reproduction steps, and then work with the person who's fixing it to make sure that that change hasn't reintroduced other problems with the system elsewhere. So in terms of how to get into QA, the easiest way is to start beta testing games and provide clear feedback to the developers. Try to find games that aren't just in early access for marketing reasons, ones that actually are unfinished or need feedback from people. Get in there and write feedback and find problems, but make sure it's really clear and communicative, because later you'll be using these examples of feedback in your portfolio to show the types of problems you found and the way that you described that. I'd also recommend becoming familiar with issue tracking software like Jira. This is the type of tool that's used internally to raise descriptions and reproduction steps for these issues, attach screenshots, and so on. It's good to have experience with that prior to getting into the industry. It's honestly also useful to be able to code. Automated testing is very valuable to companies. It's becoming a bigger and bigger thing, partly because with live service games these days, functionality needs to be tested repeatedly during and after development. Because there are so many patches being released to a game, it's important to be able to automatically test features that have previously been tested to make sure that they haven't regressed as a result of a change that's made. And to some extent, writing an automated test for something is about as much work as actually testing it manually, but is more precise and can be repeated. It's also worth noting that within the industry, QA is not a particularly glamorous job. QA staff are treated by some companies as disposable and generally not paid very well. It is a very tough job, but it has the ability to pivot to other areas of the company, because as you start to contribute more than just basic feedback, people will realize your value and expertise in other areas and may be able to transition you to a role over there. So next up, I want to talk about audio. Now, I'm using this category to refer to both music and sound effects. Even though these are both pretty different skill sets, they're sometimes done by the same people in small teams. You'll have a small audio team that handles both music and the sound for the game, but on larger teams, it's typically separated. In terms of how to get into game audio, the advice is pretty similar to the other disciplines. Essentially, make a bunch of music or sound effects, especially game music or sound effects. It's important to demonstrate that you understand what makes audio good for games in particular. For example, for music, some games dynamically mix tracks together based on what's occurring in the game. A fight starts, so it mixes in some combat music to the ambient. Try that kind of thing out for your portfolio. For sound effects, try making a demo where you take someone else's gameplay video and put your own audio effects over it. Try to make them feel punchy and communicative. Try to make it feel better than the original video that you based it on. Note that the audio directors at the companies you're applying to will recognize many of the stock sounds out there that are in sound libraries, so try to make your own sound effects if you can. For example, you can record yourself smashing up some vegetables to get gory impact sounds. Definitely note down if you made your own sounds, though, because that will impress them. Again, the portfolio is key. Make sure to lead with your best work and tailor it for the studio you're applying to. You'll notice that I haven't talked about going to study at specific game development courses that some universities offer. Now, these are, of course, useful, no doubt about it. I studied game development myself in my postgraduate year for my computer science degree, and that was very helpful to get an understanding of networking and AI and stuff before I actually started work on Path of Exile. But this kind of stuff is not mandatory. Honestly, looking at someone's portfolio to see what they can actually make is a lot more telling about them than what qualification they've done. The qualifications are useful, of course, because they're a great way of learning something, but some people aren't in a position to be able to afford the expense and time commitment of full-time study if they're treating their progression into game development as a hobby until they're good at it. So that's why my advice is basically just make a bunch of games. That's something you can do while you're studying, or it's something you can do in your spare time. It is disappointing, though, when people apply for a job where they've clearly put a lot of work in at the university learning their subject matter, but they haven't made any games in their spare time. When those people apply, my advice to them is, hey, can you actually go and try these skills out? Try making some stuff of your own rather than just assignments you've done, and then reapply, and we'll have a look at that stuff. So, when you have a portfolio of games you've made, the next step is applying to work at a company. But I want to caution you, be prepared for a rejection. This part of the process is a numbers game. You're going to send a lot of applications out. You're going to be ignored a bunch of the time. You're going to be rejected a bunch of the time. But hopefully you'll get some bites, people that really like your work and want to hire you. So there are three things you're going to have to prepare here: a cover letter, your resume, and your portfolio. But I recommend tailoring all three of them for each of the companies that you're applying for. Many people write a custom cover letter for each company, which is great, but it's also important to make sure to highlight relevant experience and relevant portfolio items that relate to the type of game that that company is making, so that when you send it to them, they see that immediately and you stand out from people who have just included a very general resume and portfolio. Generally speaking, your application is going to be judged almost entirely based on the quality of work in your portfolio. Make sure it is as good and complete as possible. Also, if you worked on team projects with other people, make sure it's clear what work you specifically did so that can be assessed properly. As I mentioned, it helps to care about what each company does and to tailor your application for each one. If you've played the games the company made or that genre of games, say so and explain your experience. If some of your work is more relevant to their art style, tools, or programming language they use, then surface that work to the front of your resume and portfolio. Make sure your portfolio is easy to access and digest. It's good to have it on a website. It's good to have a video version of it. A 1-minute demo reel is excellent. The person processing these applications is probably going to see hundreds of them. If you have a nice, easy button they can click to see your best work immediately, you'll probably rise to the top of the pack. If any of the companies that you apply to is based in another country, it's important to understand local rules and regulations regarding working in that country. For example, in New Zealand, where I'm based, it's difficult to get work visas for foreigners unless you can demonstrate that local New Zealanders are unable to do the job. In addition, free internships aren't a thing. You basically have to pay someone at least minimum wage, which makes sense. And if you aren't paying someone, you don't own the work they do, and you've got to own the work in order to release the game. And that completely rules out the idea of free internships. And I get people every day writing in offering generously their services for free, but have to be turned down because it's not possible to do that. Final note, which is advice I probably wouldn't have given last year, but has become an issue this year, is if you do decide you want to send in an incredibly long game pitch document that's clearly AI generated as your entire application, could you please just send me the prompt instead? Thanks. Well, I hope that if you're starting your journey into game development, this video contains some useful tips. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I've got a bunch of future videos planned and a quite diverse selection of topics. Let me know if there's anything in particular you'd like me to cover. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks again for your time, and see you next time.